and you know, you're absolutely committing to it in a way that when I'd watched sixth form girls in a co-ed environment play sport, they hadn't. I used to coach a girls' cricket team in a boys' school, largely boys' school, and the girls were very much aware of how they presented themselves. And then I went to this single-sex school, and they absolutely got stuck in. They really went for it. And again, I was really impressed by that. So those are perhaps just little things. I think the bigger indictment, though, is the fact that we've got science and engineering departments where there are only 2 or 3 girls in them. We need to do something about that.
Good question. Excellent answers. Thank you. More questions from the floor. Yes.
Is it true that boys perform better in co-ed schools academically and girls in single sex? Or is it just an old perception?
I have to say, I've heard a lot of research on these things, some of which is quite contradictory. If my previous headmaster had been here, he would point you to the league tables and he would say, well, look at the league tables and think about this. Co-ed schools have double the market for their pupils. They've got double the number of pupils to draw from. So why aren't there more of them at the top of the league tables? Why are the league tables dominated by single-sex schools? He would have said that. I think with boys, it is easier to push boys harder and to keep them busier in an all-boys school. I've certainly noticed that at Harrow. I'm going to say this, Helen, and if you disagree, please disagree with me, but my sense is that with girls, you cannot fill their day pushing them from one thing to the next, bang, 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 and keeping them quite so busy. I sense that they need more space, and they need more space and time to reflect. It doesn't mean that they aren't busy. It doesn't mean that they don't work themselves hard, but they do it themselves in a way. They find their own agenda for that. Whereas boys like, again, generalisation, this is my sense of it, like to be kept busy, and I'm much happier being kept busy. I mean, I have to say the lifestyle at Harrow and the hours that are kept and the demands that are made of the boys would make some of us shudder as adults. We think we're busy. But boys are quite good at that, and they're good at being kept busy in that way. I don't know if that possibly helps.
Fine, thank you very much. More questions from the floor? Just possibly taking up a point that you made about very few females in engineering departments. History has dictated that a lot of girls move on from their junior schools at 11 rather than 13 for boys' schools. There are exceptions, of course. In my view, 5 years in one educational establishment is the optimum. And I just wondered what the 2 speakers felt if that was the case. If a girl, for instance, arrives at a school aged 11, is it wise, I know Helen's response, is it wise that she moves on to a co-ed environment for the sixth form in preparation for university and a co-ed world, of course?
Totally unwise. But the reason for that is actually quite complicated. Life moves very quickly. It moves very quickly now. And there are, for better or worse, there are lots of exams which take place through the years of the year 11, year 12, year 13, and usually start earlier, in fact. So you're talking from year 10 onwards, right to the end of year 13. There will be lots of exams happening. To move halfway through that period is not a good idea. You've built up relationships with your teachers, you've built up networks, you're working out who you are headed for leadership within the school as well. So why abandon that and move when what you're doing is you're aiming towards your IB or your A levels at that point? There is a shift that takes place, a move that takes place from senior school to university, and all good schools will prepare not just for that, but for life beyond university, looking ahead to careers, looking to how you're going to balance your lives. And that's another, something else which happens very well in girls' schools. It's the ability to be able to discuss issues such as balancing life, balancing work, career, children, all sorts of things. We're able to do that very, very well.
Thank you.
End of the exhibition centre.
Could I ask another question? It's about girls. Do you think because girls sort of emotionally and physically develop quicker than boys, should girls go through the education system quicker? Should they actually be doing GCSE and A-levels slightly earlier than boys, do you think? Because traditionally the system's been set up for boys and then girls have been brought in.
That's a really, really interesting point. I mean, I've gone on record in saying that I think that our exam system needs a radical look, and there is a gender element to that, certainly. It's not easy. It's not simple to say all girls do one thing, all boys do another. It's not like that. Life isn't like that. But there is something very interesting what you say. Certainly, if you look at those ages of 11, 13, you take a girl at 11 and a boy at 13, and they're really much of a muchness in there, and you can see that later on. And I think you're right that there are many discussions about what exams should do, how they should reflect how people think, work, learn, and we should continue those, and we mustn't lose sight of that gender element. I don't think there's an easy solution to it, and I don't think either you can put all boys or all girls into one category. I'm absolutely with you in the fact that we should be looking at that very, very closely, yes.
My sort of fairly, most views I have are strongly held, I'm afraid. My fairly strongly held view is that I don't think life is a race, and I would be reluctant to see children pushed through exams sooner. I quite like, sorry to say this, but I think there is a place for girls remaining in prep schools up to 13. I think in a children's environment, I think they get a lot out of that. I think good girls' schools do take girls at 13 as a result as well. And I just think that what we should be aiming for is greater breadth in our education and more interest and more variety, and hold off the exams a little longer. But yeah, no, let's not do them sooner, and let's certainly not do more.
Indeed. I mean, there are various case studies, for instance, with religious education, which is not taken, of course, in all schools, but where the course is pushed through in 1 year, and often the results are not as good, and people come up with a B rather than the A star that they would get in the due course of time. More questions? Yes, please.
If a child spends all school life from 3 to 18 in a single-sex environment, although I heard what you said, it's not exactly unnatural, but doesn't it make him a different person from as if the child was in a co-ed or at some stage in co-ed? Because I'm worried not so much about lack of females, ladies in engineering, but like if you go to a workplace which is especially dominated by men, say you go to investment banking and you spend all your school life in a girls' school, would you know how to interact? I mean, you can have a brother, yes, but brother is a different kind of character in the girls' life. What about the social side? I mean, are girls prepared for life beyond the school? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think you need to go into a girls' school. All girls' schools that I can think of have tremendous links with boys' schools, other schools. Girls go out into, they do community service, they're involved in all sorts of groups, and not just their own peers. We're talking about younger students, older people, a whole range. Good schools prepare the children in those schools to be able to deal very, very well with society. What I think a single-sex school does is to provide, in addition to all of that, a space to understand who you are in terms of your gender, a bit of social history in there, but also to learn who you really are and not feel unnatural pressures at too early a stage. So I think we need to turn that on its head and see that all of that interaction is happening anyway. You're just gaining something extra in that single-sex environment.
If I could just say a little bit of something about this. I think that there is a certain type of man who is quite a bit older than me now, but who went through a single-sex boys' prep school, senior school, then went into the city or into the army or something like that. And people often say, emotionally repressed and find it very difficult to deal with their emotions and deal with. I think the way life's. I mean, gosh, I went to a boys' grammar school. I then was in a all-male college at university. I then went into the Royal Marines. There weren't any girls there. I then taught in an all-boys school to start with. I ought to be that kind of immensely emotionally repressed character. Thankfully, by the time I was going through schooling and education and university and all sorts of things like that, society had changed in such a way that the business of normal social interaction was, was much easier. And I might argue that perhaps the boys' grammar school and the Royal Marines and were the best possible place to meet girls and to have a normal social life. But I think 20 or 30 years before that it wasn't necessarily, and therefore, I think that was a particular issue for a certain generation of men.
Thank you very much. Well, can I thank you very much from the floor that you've posed some very interesting questions, very wide-ranging, and thank you, Helen Wright, Robert Taylor, for your words of wisdom.